So we're in the kitchen getting ready to do our pork loin jerky. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through some pictures of what I've done so far to the pork, because I had to do that a little bit ahead of time. And I'll explain that to you real quick. So first thing I did was I started with a 4-pound pork loin. It was about 4.5 pounds because I knew that I was going to need to trim it a little bit. And I took and I trimmed off the fat cap and all of the silver skin that I could get without, mutilating it too much. And I'll be honest, I'm not the world's best trimmer, but if you get underneath the edges of the silver skin and just kind of ride the knife, you can pull it up in strips. Then what I did was I took it and I sliced it in half, and then I trimmed off all of the other cuts of meat. So because of the way it's attached, there'll be a little meat that's not actually loin on the edges, but don't throw that out. Then you want to go ahead and cook up whatever you can. I went ahead and threw most of the fat in the garbage. I rendered a little bit down, and then I took the scraps and I threw them in the pan and fried them. And there's a picture of those scraps that I trimmed off the edges. Then I ended up with 2 nice level pieces of loin that are going to go through the meat slicer really well. First, I put those 2 pieces in the freezer for a little more than 30 minutes. You can go up to an hour, but what you want to avoid doing is freezing the inside. You just want a nice crust frozen on the outside. While that was happening, I cleaned up my mess, and then I went and prepped up some seasoning. Now we have 2 different seasonings here, and you can see that I've laid out some things that I put in this bag and some things here that I put in this one, and then these were in both. Now I'm going to grab the paper here real quick and I'll read that to you. Of course, we will have an article linked below as soon as I get that lined up with this, so that way you can see some of the pork jerky recipes that I use in the last couple videos. So on this one here, this is a sweet chili, and both of these kind of have a little bit of an Asian slant, but this one is more like a Asian chili, so it's not a sweet chili, but if you wanted to use that instead, you could. So first, we have chili sauce. We have a couple tablespoons of that, and we have 3 tablespoons of soy sauce. If you use low sodium soy sauce, put a pinch of salt in, but not much. And don't use iodized salt if you can avoid it. Pickling salt is perfect. Tablespoon of Worcestershire, and I put that back, but it was vinegar. It's a big gallon jug, so 2 teaspoons of white vinegar, or you can use rice wine vinegar, which I do use a lot, and then 2 tablespoons of dark brown sugar. Don't go under on that. If you err a little over, and then a tablespoon of maple syrup. This is grade A, 100% maple syrup. If you're not going to use grade A maple syrup in your cooking, then just skip it and go to honey instead. Now, then I put in Prague powder, and that is 1/4 teaspoon. So about 1/8 of a teaspoon works per pound, and this is going to be 2 pounds of meat, so 1/4 teaspoon will be perfect. Prague powder number 1 does need to be heated to work properly, so that way it changes form. Now, I don't want to say something that's incorrect and mislead you, so just go light on it, and it'll provide a little bit of a curing to your meat and help extend the life of it and make it safe to eat. And you can take your jerky out with you during the day and on a fishing trip or hunting or whatever you do, and it should be fine in your backpack all day without refrigeration if you cure it properly. Now the other one is, before I forget, optional is a little bit of sesame oil, and when I'm doing any of my Asian stuff, I like to add just a touch of oil, but not too much, because it'll tend to make your food more greasy than it already is. On pork loin, since it's so lean, I don't think that's going to be a problem. On the other flavor, we have Thai sweet and spicy. Now, the spicy comes from the white pepper, and the sweet is the oyster sauce and a little bit of sugar. So we start with 4 tablespoons of oyster sauce, and that's a 1/4 cup either way. I just try to use 1 tablespoon measuring spoon to do everything instead of getting another thing dirty. And then we have 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. Again, if you're using low sodium, add a pinch of salt. And then I don't have the sugar out here because it's in a big container, but that is a tablespoon of white sugar or confectioner's sugar. Confectioner's sugar works better, but if you use white sugar and you have a small food processor, you can run it through that or something to break down those crystals a little bit. Helps it dissolve better into the mix. Then your kick is going to be 2 teaspoons of white pepper. Now, if you like it a little milder, go lighter. If you like it hotter, go hotter. Then you have the 1/4 teaspoon of curing salt, prog powder number 1, and then the optional 1/2 teaspoon of sesame oil. Now, another item that you might consider putting in there is crushed red pepper flakes as another optional item. I might add some to a few of the pieces, but I'm not going to do the whole batch because I don't want to really make it really hot. I like to share my smoked food around because I can't eat all this myself. So I'm going to leave it out of this recipe at this time, but it's a great addition. Now I'm going to go get the pork loins and clean up my mess here and get to slicing. So I got the pork loins out of the freezer, and here they are, and they're very, very firm, where before they were very soft. So I'm going to go ahead and use the slicer, and we'll adjust that to a little under 1/4 inch. And the thinner the slices, the quicker and drier it will cook. So the slice thickness is up to you. If you want big chunky pieces, that's fine. I think that with this thickness, I think that about 1/4 inch or under would be perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and slice that up, and we'll be right back. I went ahead and sliced both pork loins up, and I'm going to show you this really quick because they were each 2 pounds. I went ahead and put the first one in the bag so I could get exactly 2 pounds on the second one. These are the strips of jerky that we're looking at, and this is going to be the perfect size for small jerky snacks. You'll probably eat 2 or 3 of them at a time, but they'll cook well and they'll cure well, which is a really important part to this. So now I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in the bag, and then I'll be right back with you. So before I loaded the jerky in the bag, I made sure that I worked this mix together really well. I tried to keep it down near the bottom of the bag so that way I can mix it in really good. And then as soon as it's mixed in, I set it aside and let it go ahead and completely hydrate. So all the spices were completely well mixed and had the liquid good. Now, next thing I want to do is, with a little bit of air in the bag, I want to seal it. So I'll open it up a little bit, make sure there's air in there, and then slowly seal it. Then double check the seal and make sure it's sealed well. Now, we're going to toss this around. So keep a good hold of the opening. And as my backup, I like to do this either in a bowl or in a pan or over the counter on a cutting board. In this case, I have the pan that I use to go in the freezer, so I can just roll it around a little bit, work it all in. The air inside the bag helps it move around real good. And you want to break it up a little bit, otherwise you could end up with pieces that don't have any of the mixture on it. And remember, the mixture has the cure powder in there, and you want to make sure that that cure powder gets around everything. Now that will of course draw a little bit of moisture out of the meat, and then the meat will draw that moisture back in, just like the same process that you have of osmosis with regular salt. It will act the same way, pulling the cure in to the meat. Now, I've got this all done, and this one's already done. I'll go ahead and mix that one more time. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the refrigerator, bottom shelf in the back, in the coolest spot I can find. And something I want to point out is that if you have some venison or something like that, wild game meat, and you wanted to have it smoked fresh when you use it, You could pre-package it like this to this point and then get all the air out and freeze it. I would personally use a vacuum seal bag, but with this, it will freeze with the seasoning, and then when you unfreeze it, it will complete its curing process and be perfect to go in the smoker by the time it's unfrozen. So your wait time will process in the bag on the freeze process and on the de-thaw process, rather than worrying about letting it sit overnight in the fridge. This needs to sit for the 2 pounds at a minimum of 8 hours, but 12 hours is better. I'm gonna flip this at least twice before I get done. So I'll set the timer right now for 2 hours and flip it again, and then 2 hours again and flip it, and then let it sit overnight.